and all that though, right?
We got the name, yeah.
Okay,
If you could just talk about Antiwar again.
Okay, so you were part of anti-war protests. Talk a little bit about what that looked like, because now protesting is different, as you know. So what was it then?
Well, I'll tell you a story about the closest I ever came to being shot dead. And that'll give you sort of a flavor for what the anti-war stuff was like, at least where I was going to school in Berkeley. So it was my first semester at Berkeley. This was fall 1970. It was just a few months after the invasion of Cambodia and Kent State. Right. There was combat going on in the south part of Telegraph Avenue. If you've ever been to Berkeley, Telegraph Avenue runs north from Oakland through Berkeley and then runs directly into the UC campus at Bancroft.
Okay.
So right there at Bancroft and Telegraph, there's the Student Union building. And around the second floor of the Student Union building, there's an outside balcony. So since I knew that there was combat going on further south on Telegraph, I thought, well, I'll go up on the balcony and look down the street and see what's going on. So I walked up the staircase. When I got up there, there were other folks there, but they were all standing against the wall of the building. I did not stop to think about why. So I walked to the balcony, leaned out over it to see what was going on down Telegraph, and down at the foot of the building, there's 3 Alameda County Sheriff's deputies with shotguns on their hips. And simultaneously, you know, as if they were doing synchronized policing or something, they chamber rounds, point their weapons at me, and say, "Step away from the railing."
Wow.
Which, of course, I did.
Mm-hmm.
And then I realized this is probably not the best place in the world for me to be. So I walked back down the stairs and started walking through Sproul Plaza and away from the Student Union building. When I'd gotten, I don't know, maybe 30 feet away, I turned back and there were a whole line of cops with their guns drawn going up the stairs to clear the building.
Wow.
So that kind of gives a flavor of what the situation was
And
like.
they had shotguns.
Yeah, they had shotguns.
That's crazy.
And in those days, remember, rubber bullets were first invented by the British and first used in Northern Ireland. So it wasn't very common to use rubber bullets in those days. Generally, what cops used if they didn't want to kill you outright was birdshot.
Wow. So there were times, like you said, combat. So you mean where the protesters were clashing with the? Is that what you mean?
That's exactly what I mean.
Okay.
The Alameda County Sheriff's deputies had armored cars that they would fit out with sections of chain link fence on both sides so that they could sweep up the street, you know, and just push crowds in front of them.
Wow. So you did all this, and at the time you knew you were gay, you know?
Yeah.
So I think for a lot of people now, we think about the gay rights movement, and it's like as if that was all the people who were involved in it, that was it. So how did this intersection, how did this stuff matter in your life? I mean, obviously, being gay plays into some things, but it just doesn't seem to fit for some people, I guess. Like anti-war, gay, all this. How did you rationalize things back then?
Well, it seemed to fit at the time, right? Because I think for most people who were involved in the anti-war movement, and maybe I shouldn't claim to speak for people other than myself, but just based on conversations that we had in those days, I think for most people it wasn't just the war, or it wasn't just civil rights, or it wasn't just being gay. It was, you know, the idea maybe that the country wasn't working for a lot of folks.
Like now.
Like now, right.
I've been saying that this year is going to be 1968. I think there's so many historical things that point directly to, we're seeing it over and over again. People just feel like nothing is working because nothing's working.
Well, because nothing is working, that's exactly right. Because even when we make some gains, like for example, marriage equality, which, a couple of years ago, most people wouldn't have imagined that it would have come as quickly as it did, right?
Right.
Even when we make those gains, there's still things that hold us back. For example, we have marriage equality. We can form the families that we want to form. How are our families going to be sustainable if we're not making enough money? We can't provide health care. We can't provide, quality schools for our kids.
Yeah, so there's a new burden with what the equality we've got. We now we have this new burden, like other families have had. Their struggle.
Right. You win some stuff, but that always raises other questions.
Right. For a person like yourself with all this experience, different unions and everything, why the union? Why? We hear about, and everybody knows the Coors story because of the movie Milk. But can you talk about how the union is connected with the gay community and how that relationship works?
There's no one answer to that. Some unions have always been fairly open to LGBT folks. For example, even in the 1940s, the Maritime Cooks and Stewards Union, which represented folks who served in the galleys on ships, was notoriously queer. Also, notoriously communist.
Interesting.
Here in Seattle, very early on, there was a guy named Bill Olwell, who was in the Retail Clerks Union, who was elected president of the King County Labor Council. This was, late 60s, early 70s.
And he was gay.
He was gay.
Okay. Why was that significant, do you think?
Because it was at a period when it was not easy to be gay and not easy to be gay in the labor movement.
So he was voted in by his peers.
He was, yeah.
That is very significant, yeah. And what years was that around?
Late 60s, early 70s.
Wow. You hear a lot about how Seattle has been progressive on these issues over the years. Where do you feel Seattle has fit in the movement for equality for us?
That's hard to answer because I don't have experience with very many other cities, right? I've lived here since 1976. So
do you feel we're unlucky?
It's always seemed like a challenge, because it is a challenge, but I guess other people in other places have had more severe challenges.
Yeah, I could say that. I guess kind of what I was getting at is that it seems like no matter what Seattle's involved in, there's no attention paid to the successes up here. It seems like it's like, unless it's Chicago, New York, Los Angeles.
If you're talking about the mainstream media, yeah, that's true, because people think that the country ends at the Mississippi. Right?
Yeah. That's very true. I just always wondered about that, because you meet so many people like yourself that have been involved in so much, and it's like, you'd think that there would be more out there about everybody, but there isn't here.
Well, just to give you an example, in 2008, the King County Labor Council changed its constitution to give representation to constituency organizations like Pride at Work on the executive board. AFL-CIO International back in Washington, D.C. didn't think that was a very good idea. But people here pushed for it, and the changes stuck, and now it's standard in central labor councils to give representation to the constituency organizations.
Wow.
And maybe I should backtrack and explain that the constituency organizations represent communities that have historically been marginalized or shut out of power, like the African American community, Asian Pacific Islanders, Latinos and Latinas, and Pride at Work represents the LGBT community. So this was kind of a breakthrough, and it happened here, now standard,
That's
across the
interesting.
country. Yeah. It was, I'd have to give credit to Dave Fryboth, who's the executive secretary of the Labor Council, because he was on board with this right away.
Wow.
And he was able to steer it through the Labor Council so that it didn't meet significant opposition.
Now, there's been a number of things that have happened where labor seems to be behind equality, especially lately. I mean, the last couple of years, they just come right out with it. I mean,
Yeah.
from the candidates they support to the referendums, all that stuff. Why? I mean, how does that make you feel as someone who's a part of the labor union?
Well, it makes me feel successful, and it makes me feel that all the other labor activists that I've worked with over the years have been successful, because that was one of our objectives, right?